Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar session called Customizing CK-12 Adaptive Practice and Assignments. I'm Lindsay, one of the CK-12 team members, and my colleague Katie and I will be running today's webinar. I want to give a special welcome to those of you who participated in our CK-12 Certified Educator Program that we ran this July. I know some of you on this webinar are continuing that education this fall with us. Just a reminder that our Certified Educator Program is completely free, and participants become certified when they attend 5 live webinar sessions, watch 2 on-demand sessions, and complete the 7 matching assignments. If you joined us for some sessions this summer and are attending today to fulfill your requirements, please continue working in the CEP July 2019 class that you've already been working in. If you are brand new to the Certified Educator Program and you are probably a little bit clueless about what I'm talking about, you can go to www.ck12.org/certified and find more information about our program there. There's also a register button that you can click to fill out the information form, and you'll receive details about how to join the program and get started with assignments. So we can talk more about this at the end of today's webinar if you have questions, or you're welcome to type certified educator questions in the Q&A window for our team to answer. So that brings me to the Zoom webinar platform. Hopefully you guys are seeing 2 window options in Zoom for you today. The one that says Q&A is the best place for you to type questions that you have for our team. Katie's going to be doing most of the presenting today, and she's going to stop occasionally and answer questions that you guys have typed into the Q&A window. The chat window is the place that we really leave for you guys, the community, to have a conversation. So the only tricky thing about the chat window is that by default, it only sends your messages to all panelists. So that's just those of us here on the CK-12 team. But if you're wanting everyone to see your message, that we hope you will, you need to change that to say all panelists and attendees. So I really encourage you guys to tell us who you are, where you're from, what you teach. And just make sure, again, that you're sending it to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see your message. Okay, the next thing that I want to point out is that we have a resource page for you. You can find it at the tiny URL listed on the screen. That's tinyurl.com/CK12 custom AP 2019. You can also find this in our program Flexbook if you've already accessed that. And we'll put it in the chat window here in just a second for you guys to have easy access to click on it. You're welcome to print these resource pages, or you can simply save them as a reference down the road, but we've created them for you to hopefully find them useful at some point. So now that you know about that Q&A window and about that chat window, I think we're off and running. So let me go ahead and bring on my colleague, Katie.
Thanks, Lindsay. And thanks to everyone who joined us today for our session on customizing practice. In our Getting Started with CK-12 Adaptive Practice and Assignment session, we covered the basics of our practice system along with classes and reports. So if you missed that session, I highly encourage you to revisit that archived recording on our webinars page or join us whenever we offer some variation of that session in the future. In this webinar today, we're going to cover the following. We're going to start by talking about customizing practice into quizzes. So we'll talk about the difference between practice and quizzes, and then kind of how to start creating your quiz. Within that, you have the option to create your own questions and even use our math text editor to kind of get special formatting for equations or symbols. And then finally, we'll talk about how to use those quizzes. So using them as inline questions, replacing practice with quizzes in our new 2.0 environment, and if you assign them, what that looks like in reports for you. So our main goal is that by the end of this session, you understand the difference between practice and quizzes, and you can create your own custom quizzes and even questions, know how to use them, and what reports will look like for both practice and quizzes on CK-12.
Okay, before we really get you started, Katie, on that content, why don't we find out a little bit more about who's on this webinar today? We would like to launch a poll in a few seconds that asks you about your current knowledge of CK-12 offerings for practice and for quizzes. So hopefully you are seeing the poll on the screen right now. And here is the question for you. What experience do you have with CK-12's adaptive practice and quizzes? This is a multiple choice question. I'm new to CK-12's adaptive practice. I use it. I've customized it into quizzes, and I've embedded it into quizzes or inline questions. Okay, I'm going to give you a second to look at this. Again, it kind of goes from beginner down to some advanced skills. I'm curious, Katie, do you have any idea? What do you think? What are the results going to be?
This is the advanced one. So I would assume we have some people that are probably still new to CK-12's practice and others that maybe have used the practice but are looking to go from there. It looks like we're hitting the, 85, 90% of you guys have answered. So maybe a few more seconds and then we will wrap it up.
All right, why don't we see those poll results? And we're happy to share them with you as well. Okay, so we still have a bunch of people who are new to CK-12's adaptive practice. And like Katie said earlier, if you have not had a chance to check out the Getting Started with Adaptive Practice, that would be a great session for you to revisit after this. You might be feeling like you've been thrown into the deep end a little bit. And then some of you have used it, some of you have customized it, and some of you have even embedded it and swapped out practice for a quiz. So that's awesome, all different levels here. Okay, so we're going to move on to talk about the difference between CK-12's adaptive practice and customized quizzes. So let's talk about the similarities between adaptive practice and quizzes first. Both of these things that we're going to be talking about today, the practice and the quizzes, they both pull from CK-12's database of 150,000 questions. Now, these questions are primarily math, science, with a little bit of spelling in there as well. These can be quick assigned from their modality pages or assigned through CK-12 classes or a learning management system. Reports for both of these include time spent, levels of questions, answers chosen, etc. Students can access both practice and assigned quizzes through a browser on a phone, tablet, or laptop. There are hints available, but for quizzes, you have the option to turn those off if you'd like. There is a scratch pad option, and you can choose the due date if assigning. So those are things that they have in common.
Thanks, Lynn. So let's kind of break this up into the difference of what we're talking about today. So our adaptive practice, that adjusts to student skill level. It offers kind of harder questions if they're being successful. It offers them easier questions if they are struggling, in order for them to kind of understand what they're at and answer questions that are appropriate to their skill level. If they're really struggling, it will actually stop and offer modality recommendations. So you can see kind of on the screen there that there might be a video or an interactive or text they can read to kind of help them learn that particular concept. They pick up where they left off. So this isn't something that's kind of like an assessment that you would give them. This is really, truly practice. Think of it as homework that you might give your kids, where they all work their way through some questions. They see which ones they struggle with. You can come back in, see how they did. It's cumulative. So if they, worked on it a little bit here, it saves their progress, then they continue on and kind of aiming to get that goal of 10 correct, but then eventually working their way even to that goal or beyond if they want to keep practicing. And then the last thing is that hints are always available for them. So I'd say most, if not all, of our math and science and even some of our spelling questions have hints attached to them that can help them with that question. Really, this is truly a practice learning tool for them. Now, if you click customize on that adaptive practice page right there in the middle, that's what starts the process of creating a quiz. So now let's talk about quizzes. So right now you have the option to use our adaptive practice as it is, or you can customize it over into what we call a quiz. And quizzes are being used a number of different ways, sometimes for a quiz, sometimes for other reasons, or more just like a custom homework. But a few things to note if you're using our quiz tool is that it is not adaptive. So the questions that you pick are the same questions every student will get. It's not going to hand pick different questions for kids based on their skill level. You can choose the number of questions that you want, and the system will auto-pull a variety of easy, medium, hard, different types of questions, and add them in there. Or you can hand pick your own questions from our database of that 150,000 questions that Lindsay was talking about. And you can even create new questions for yourself. So if you want to write your own questions, you can add that into your quizzes from there. Please note that our license does not allow you to create questions that you have paid for or licensed. Those cannot be added to our system, but you can write your own questions or questions you have rights to use within our license. And then, unlike a practice where the percentage is based on getting a goal of 10 correct, a quiz report will give you a clean percentage score. So it's a, let's say I got 5 out of 10 questions right, I get 50%. But if I got 10 out of 20 questions right, I would still get 50%. Whereas that first case, even if I had done 20 questions, if I met my goal of 10 correct in adaptive practice, I would get that goal of getting that correct and I would have 100% on there. So just keep that in mind, that that is a distinction between the quiz and the practice. Now, students start from the beginning each time. Because this is used as a quiz sometime, it's not something that currently has a save progress option. We are looking into possibilities for that down the road. But right now, if a student opens this and they work on it, they're attempting that from scratch. So make sure that if you're making a quiz, you don't put like 200 questions in it and ask them to kind of go through and do some today and some tomorrow and some the next day. You'd want to make those separate assignments so that they can actually get through that in one sitting. And then you have the option to turn off hints, set some times, do different things. We do have a new option that you can use this quiz feature in a Flexbook, and when presented that way, it would be embedded as inline questions. So any of you guys that are exploring our new middle school math books, and we're working our way through our higher ones too, you'll see questions built into the lesson itself, and those are what we call inline questions. Students are given multiple attempts. We often, for the ones that we create specifically for that scenario, we give feedback because that's even more of a learning tool. It's in the moment learning within that lesson. So I will show you what this looks like down the road, but in this webinar today, but definitely kind of keep that in mind, that you now have the ability to create your own questions or your own quizzes and embed them as inline questions in our text. So the real question is, where do you start if you are looking to customize practice? So if you want to create a new quiz, you can go to your library, click Create New, and choose the quiz option. From there, you'll be able to add existing questions from CK-12 concepts, or you can create your own, as I said. Now, to create a quiz by customizing practice, you can access that through the practice browse page, which is kind of the window you saw there. Or if you're on a specific modality page for practice, that's for a particular practice type or kind of concept that you're working with, you can choose customize on the left navigation for that. And that will kick you into customization. So I'm gonna steal this over from Lindsay, and we will show you what this looks like on our site. Feel free to continue to ask questions as we go through. Star's been doing a great job answering them. I will stop after I do this first live demo piece to answer any additional ones that we want to kind of show live. But let me go from here. So as we said, the first thing, if you're going to use the customize option, is that you'd be starting with CK-12 practice. So there are two ways to find adaptive practice to customize. One is by browsing our practice. So I could browse practice by clicking on Explore from kind of almost anywhere on our site, and then click on Adaptive Practice. So that's one option. I could get to that same adaptive practice by using these great new little rectangular options on our homepage. And either one of these will take me to my adaptive practice browse. So you can see here there's grades 1 through 5. That's actually lower level math questions, upper level math, middle school and high school concepts, and some arithmetic and measurement for lower levels as well. And then our science concepts and a little bit of spelling tossed in there. So I could pick, let's say, Earth Science. You can see it looks like I've opened the scientific method, but I haven't necessarily started it. This percentage on the right-hand side is actually what students will see as they work their way through practice. So that is something that if they browse through practice, they could see anything that they had been working on. But if I go into that scientific method option, I could go from right here. I could check out the practice by clicking on keep practicing or start practicing or view practice if you hadn't opened it at all. And then the thing right here is this customize button exists right between the assign to class and the download a worksheet option. So that's just something to keep in mind. So if I click customize there, you'll see it within browsing practice from this option. Let's do one more way before I click over to the customizing piece. So I could search for a concept right here, and that would take me to the same thing. So let's say water cycle. So I could search for that, and I could see some options here. Or I don't even have to go into the practice to start. So let's click on that logo, get me back to my home page, and I can search within here for something. So let's say the water in all of CK-12, and I'm going to open that up. I want to make sure I'm not going into a Flexbook, so I'm going to do it kind of in the broader piece. And then I can filter, and I'm going to look for practice based on that. So I'm going to click on the water cycle practice. And here, instead of the customize at the top, you'll see the customize on the left here. But that's the same customize button no matter which way you access it, whether that's through practice, browse, or through a particular concept like this. And once I click customize, it will kick me into the question quiz editor. So for here, I can title this. So for today, I'm going to say a demo for October. If I can spell, webinar. And then I have a couple of options. So I could put a description. This is a webinar example. For you, it might be helpful to include maybe what you're putting in this as your description on what you created this quiz for, where it's going. That's not something that students necessarily see when they're doing it, but it does give you a little bit of heads up if you open that to kind of figure out what it is. Now there's a few options on the right side for quizzes. The first is the number of attempts. So you could do unlimited attempts. That means you're treating it just kind of like a regular assignment where a kid could come in and out of it. They could start it anytime they wanted. They could try it a couple times over, not a problem. Or you could set the attempts to maybe 1 or 2, all the way up to 10 attempts for a particular quiz. Please do remember that if a student starts it and stops, that's 1 attempt, and the next time they start it, they start over again, and that's their 2nd attempt. If there is a glitch, you can always dismiss an attempt before a due date, so it's not going to mess up a student if you assign that quiz to them. But just remember that kind of this is an option for you, and each time you access and start and work your way through that, that counts as an attempt in our system. You can also set a time limit. So let's say you wanted students to actually treat this as maybe an exam. I have some teachers in college that sometimes build their own exams out of this. That might be where they would set a time limit, say, a couple of hours or 20 minutes or, whatever that looks like for a quiz versus a test. But you do have the choice to put a time limit on that. That is for anyone doing that quiz. So if you need to give a student extra time, just keep that in mind that you're setting it for every student there, and that may not be the best choice to work off of. For the most part, your questions are in English, so that's kind of frozen out for right now, especially if you're starting with questions in English. We are working on some projects to give options in other languages for some of our questions, but that's not quite yet available. And then you have 3 options here. So one is show hints. So those hints are the hints that are included with the questions when a student is doing practice. You could show the solution after they access or answer it, but that's does not work for time quizzes because we don't want to slow them down. And it's not really a choice that's often chosen for teachers. They kind of want to have students go through it and then they can work through them if they have other pieces. And then the last option is to shuffle questions. So what that does is it gives, while every student has the same exact questions, they would be getting them in a different order so that a student who did question 1 and then 2 wouldn't be doing the same order of questions as the person next to them. So that kind of helps with having students work on different things at different times. Those are all options. I'm going to leave that shuffle questions off for just a minute because I can't reorder if I have selected it. The system randomly picks an order, so setting an order doesn't make sense. Once I have kind of the top piece set, or even before that if I want to, I can go over to the concept that I started customizing. So here I've picked the water cycle. Our system has randomly chosen 20 questions from a variety of question types that are available for that concept and from a variety of levels, whether easy, medium, or hard. I can choose to reset this number. So let's say I only want 10 questions in this particular quiz. Once I do that, the minute I click outside of that to save it, it will warn me that I am resetting any earlier changes to this question set. So right now that's fine. I haven't made any earlier changes, so I'm going to go from there. But what it's doing at that point is it's picking a random set of those 10 questions from, in this case, there are 54 different questions in our system on the water cycle to choose from. I could, however, go in and edit the actual questions. So let's go ahead and preview them, see what they are, go from here. You can see kind of different questions that were chosen. This has a highlighted item or a box in it, so let's expand that and see what it looks like. It says blank is the process by which water changes from a liquid into water vapor. So I'm going to go with evaporation. See if that's correct. Great, I could try that again. You can see here that you have true, false, fill in the blank, true, false, multiple choice, short answer, and a variety of easy, medium, hard. And then these are all by this author. You can actually sort this way. So I could sort the difficulty level for easy, medium, and hard as I work my way through. Maybe I want to kind of work there. That does get complicated if you have a bunch that were already pre-selected to kind of reorder. But let's say I like these 10 questions, great. But maybe I don't want this question. So I'm going to remove question number 4 by deselecting that. And then maybe I'm going to remove one of the hard questions down here. So now I've picked 8 questions. I can reorder them however I want by dragging up and down, only because I haven't chosen the shuffle questions. If I had chosen shuffle questions, this would lock in the order because the order wouldn't really matter. But so just kind of keep that in mind as you go through. And however I choose to reorder these or work with them, what will happen now that I've resorted it, I'm going to save this for a second because it will make my life drastically easier. You'll see that I have 8 questions here. And when I go back in, the 8 questions that I chose will all be at the top. So that might make it a little easier to work with if I didn't actually want them spread out as much as I had before. And then I can reorder. So note that once I've chosen those 8 questions, I don't want to reset this number this way, because if I do that, it will pull a random new set of 9 questions or 7 questions or whatever number I pick. So if you want control over the individual questions, make sure you're editing using the pencil edit icon and not just randomly choosing a question as we go from there. Now, in addition to adding kind of this concept here, I can add a question set. So let's say I wanted to add more questions on water. I could have browsed through that, or I could search for that within here. I could create new questions for a brand new concept, maybe for a lesson I wrote myself that might not match CK-12. That's totally fine. We will get into that in the next part of this webinar. But for right now, let's pick questions that I wanted from here. And so what that will do is, in this case, it looks like that's maybe a smaller concept. There's less questions. It picked 10 to work with. I could do the same thing again. I could say I only want 5 or 4 from there. Totally fine. It will warn you every time because I can guarantee I will forget that I don't want to change that. And then I can also order these in a different order. So I could say I actually want water first and then the water cycle second. So just grab this ordered number piece up in the top left and it will reorder them for you. So that's kind of a way to reorder sections, to add new sections. Note that I get 100 questions max in here. And our system will default to like 10 or 20 per topic. And so what you want to make sure is that you don't add in like 10 topics that have more than 10 questions in them to start with, because then you will max out. So if you only want like 2 questions from this topic and 2 questions from that and 5 questions from this as you build kind of a chapter test or something like that, just make sure that you're resetting the number for each concept so that you have no more than 100 questions to start. And then you can kind of continue on from there to make edits. But you will lose the ability to add new concepts if you have over 100 questions. So just something to keep in mind. So I can update this. This gives me a chance to see what this looks like, how it works. I could go back to the practice, which is where I came from, or I could actually preview this quiz and see what it looks like. So as we said, remember that was evaporation. I can even just kind of skip my way through to see the questions my students will get if I wanted to see them here. Make sure this works here. We have some hints floating through here as well. All options as we go through. So I'm good to go with this. I've updated everything. And if I want to go from here, I can go back to back. Once again, it takes me to, in this case, the water cycle, which is the practice I started with. So then comes the fun question. I now made a quiz, and where does it live? All customized content that you work on lives in your library. So I can click on that library, and you will see my demo for October webinar quiz there. If I open it up, it should have, let's say, A+4 is 12 questions in it for the 2 different concepts I had. And I didn't set a time limit or a number of attempts, so that's not a problem. So note that I can find this here. I could also find it kind of if I was looking through search for anything that I had published. So quizzes will show up for yourself because there's not really a publish option. But if you search for them, you could pull that up as well. And if you are looking for it in your library, that library does give you the option, if I go back there for a sec, to filter accordingly. So I could filter by type. I'm gonna, let's say, pull all of my quizzes if I just wanted to do that. So I'm gonna pause for a second before we move into creating your own questions and see what types of questions you guys might be asking me right now.
Well, you know, Katie, they've actually been pretty quiet. So now is a good time to remind everybody, if you do have any questions while Katie's doing a demo, to put them in the Q&A window. Star has answered a few by typing, but one open Q&A question for you, Katie, is about the Improve This Question button. The user's asking, if I submit an Improve This Question form, how soon might you read it and possibly change the question or answer choices?
Well, we have our teammates kind of looking at that. I know that one of our teammates has been actively going through a bunch of those. I was responsible for spelling, so I checked that kind of routinely throughout time. You could see an update that day. You could see an update kind of down the road a little bit, depending on how quickly we get, how many question or, improve this question things, whether that's a, hey, this is worded a little bit differently, or I think it might be better if you added this, or sometimes a, here's an alternate answer. That's probably a big one that we get sometimes, where we created a question, we thought this would be a great answer, and there's actually another valid answer that we might not have thought about when making that question. And that's a great example for Improve That Question. If you have any kind of bigger concerns before that question comes in, I don't believe it's an automatic notification. I think that's the next question. If you did want to be notified when those questions were updated, or you wanted us to take a look at a specific one, or a broader thing than just a specific question, sorry, let me use it that way. You can always email us at support, and we can kind of work with you to make sure that you're getting the communication back that has been updated and addressed. So just let us know, and we are here to help.
Yeah, a couple of users, Star already answered them, but a couple of users were asking about the students' ability to restart practice. And so we just wanted to remind everybody that the adaptive practice tool, it's meant to be practice. And so students can kind of start and stop whenever they like. And even after they end up getting their 10 correct, they can always choose to answer more questions and continue on before they go to the next concept. So it is viewed as practice where they can do a little later, and come back to it whenever they would like. We just got another question into Q&A. Am I able to create quizzes through our learning management system through the CK-12 app?
So any customization work you're going to want to do through CK-12 itself. We are integrated with Google Classroom, Canvas, and Schoology. For Google Classroom, you actually do all of your work in CK-12 and then assign out to Google Classroom, and students do work there, and you can see reports there. For Canvas and Schoology, you still do all of your customization quiz creation in CK-12, making sure that you're using the same account for that, and not kind of a home account on CK-12 and a school account in Canvas that wouldn't link up cleanly. But if you do that customization work, you can then access all of your customized work from within Canvas or Schoology and assign it accordingly. As for number of questions, the adaptive practice goal of 10 correct is a set goal across our system. So if you wanted to make that a different number than 10, then we recommend you use our quiz feature, in which case they would get the questions you picked, and the goal would be kind of 15 correct or 20 correct or 5 correct, depending on what you wanted from there. We are looking into options to kind of have a adaptive customized version, but that is not out at this time. So right now your options are that goal of 10 correct with practice, or customizing it into a quiz, which is what we're talking about today.
Okay, keep your questions coming. We are going to move on to the next section right now, which is called creating questions for quizzes. And so, yeah, Katie, I mean, I know you just answered a ton of Q&A, but are you ready to continue with this next part?
Yeah, let's go. So as Lindsay said, I think she cut out for a split second there, creating questions for quizzes. This section is all about making your own questions if you want to do that. The first thing is like what types of questions you can create. So the first three types are your standard kind of multiple choice questions. So multiple choice is pretty straightforward, 3 or more answers. I think it's like 3 to 6 answers for that or something like that. Select all that apply would be the same thing, but more than one answer would be correct. And then true false could be used for true false, or you could replace that with, let's say, positive or negative for numbers as your answer. So those are pretty straightforward, where a student is just selecting an answer choice from a list of choices. The short answer and fill in the blank questions. Short answer is kind of the question prompt and then they answer, and fill in the blank might be one or more blanks within a question itself. And those ones, we set a system where you can't put more than 3 words in those blanks as the answer. Anything more than that gets super complicated with the different phrasing students might or might not use and it counting correctly. So just make sure that you're looking at short answers or fill in the blanks as really 1, 2, maybe 3 words or expressions or something like that in there. Our drag and drop option is a categorizing option. So maybe you're sorting, as I just said, positive and negative numbers or constants and variables or something like that. So you'd be sorting those there. And highlighting is like circling the right answer. So a student would just kind of select a word or a phrase. Once they click within that word or phrase that's chosen, it would highlight the whole word or phrase, and they would be choosing that as their answer for there. And the final type that you have options to build from is our discussion question type. This is a type where there is no right or wrong answer. It is literally a discussion prompt. And it is meant to be a way to kind of start a discussion in class, not necessarily have a student answer within the system, because there's not an open response option for them to kind of answer there. You'll see those a lot at the end of our Plix questions. So if any of you guys are familiar with our Plix interactives, most, if not all of them, the last question is a discussion question type, and it really just encourages students when they finish that activity, that interactive, to start a discussion with their classmates or you as a whole class, or even on our forum to have a broader extension of that activity. So those are the question types. In order to customize them, the first thing you would do is pick your type, because that gives you all the fields that you need to fill out. So before you do anything else, make sure you've picked your question type that you are writing. Fill in the question prompt. Add in the answers, and if it's multiple choice, also the incorrect or answers or distractors. If you want to include hints, you can add hints. You can set the difficulty level at easy, medium, or hard. Over time, as students do work in our system will kind of reset that based on, if 90% of students are getting a question right or wrong or something like that, it may reset from easy to hard or hard to easy or something like that, as it says, maybe this question is a little more complicated than you originally intended it to be. And then you can add in question details, grade levels, standards, kind of other pieces that you want. And we do have an option if you want to include variables where each kid gets kind of a different number in there. That's an advanced version. I'll kind of hint at it today, but it's something you may want to explore if you're super excited about creating questions that include that option. So in order to do so, we do have a built-in math editor for anyone that has customized text in our system. This is the same math editor you will see in our Flexbooks, but it does allow you to create formatted math and science text with equations and variables and different pieces. So keep that in mind as an option to do that. And you can even kind of upload images or videos within your questions or your answers in our system. So let's talk about 3 different types of questions first, and then we'll jump into the live part of this. So a multiple choice question, you can see kind of the build option for there. There's your question blank, some choices to work off of. And then if we actually saw it from the front side from a student would see the question, the answer choices, and then that's where the hint is open already for them to see. The next option is a highlighting option. So here I'd actually be selecting. What you do is you kind of select each of the letters in this case, because I spaced them out. So each letter is almost like a word in our system. Added those as answer choices. And then when a student gets to it, they can click on the answers. As I said, it was whole words that you're working with. So in order to have them select individual letters, I had to put spaces and really break up that word. Especially if students are doing this on a phone, it's just too complicated for them to try to choose individual letters within a single word. So we've set that parameter for there. And if you choose more than one, whether that's select all that apply or whether that was highlighting on the right choice there, you can see that the first two, they got correct, both of them, so they got credit for that question. The second one, they didn't get credit for that question because they only got one out of those two pieces there. And the last one here is a sample drag and drop. So as I said, this was categorizing. So equivalent, equal, and not equal were options for here. Same concept as highlighting, where I select the options, put them down, and then I drag them into the categories as I build it. And then when I kick that over to the option there, the students would do the same thing. They would drag it in to each individual part, and they get credit if they got all those parts correct.
All right, so before Katie demonstrates how to create questions on our site, I do want to take on a few frequently asked questions in case this helps clarify some things for you. The first one is, where do questions that I create live? And the answer is, questions you create live on the back end. You can access and edit your questions through the quiz editor by adding the concept to which they're tagged. And Katie will show that to you. Can everyone see the questions I create? Questions you create are not automatically published to the CK-12 question bank. If you share a link to the quiz you created that includes your own questions, then other users will be able to see those questions. But just because you typed in a question does not put it into the bank for everybody to see. Can I share my questions with others? Like I said, you can share quizzes currently via the matching URL with other people, but these quizzes would include your original questions. So not sharing individual questions, but sharing at the quiz level is a possibility. And then how can I create questions for concepts not available on CK-12? And we've done some work on this, so you can do it. You can do this through our quiz editor. You can create a new quiz from your library, click Add Question Set, and create new questions. And then when selecting a concept, you can actually search in your library to tag questions to a custom read. This is something that we cover in the non-STEM or community contributed and non-STEM content webinar. So we do encourage you to attend this if you're interested in more about creating your own Flexbooks and your own questions for concepts that maybe are outside of the STEM area that need to be tagged to a read in your library. So Katie, we'll see if that helped folks or confused folks, but you're gonna do a demo of kind of what I just talked about here.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Hopefully we did just get a question right before you did that asked about sharing. So you can share your content. Right now, there isn't kind of a customize option for quizzes from there in that like they can't edit questions you made, but they can use those questions if you shared that quiz. So you could make a quiz, share it with the teacher, they can assign that same quiz to students and they don't have to kind of rebuild it from scratch. But there's not currently an option where if you're making questions, they have the ability to edit those questions themselves. So hopefully that answers that piece. For now, as Lindsay said, I'm gonna go in, we're gonna look about what that looks like. So if I click create new, I'm gonna create a new quiz. That means I start fresh. And I'm gonna add, let's say this is demo 2. I'm going to add questions to here. So the first thing, I could search before, or I could create new questions for this particular concept. So from here, remember that I said the first thing you want to do is you want to pick the type of question you have. So here, if I switch this to true false, it jumps to 2 options here. If I switch it to short answer, it jumps to the question prompt. And then the answer choices there. You can ignore spaces. Let's say I wanted like 2x plus 3 to count, but I also wanted 2 space x space plus 3 to count. So I would do ignore spaces to make sure that both answers would be available as correct answers for students. So some different pieces there as you go through. Let's talk about kind of the ones that are a little more complicated. So why don't I do a fill in the blank question? So this is a great option for kind of a more complicated short answer question where I really have too many pieces. So I could say, write a 3rd degree polynomial with roots 2, -1, and 3. So if I'm doing a fill in the blank, to build it, I would actually write out this piece, y equals x to the 3rd minus 4 x squared plus x plus 6, okay? Now, if I wanted to use the math formatter equation editor, I could click that, open the equation editor, and kind of build it all in here, but that would treat it as a single block. If I want them to answer the kind of pieces in here, then what I can do is I can say, okay, we're gonna make this a power, that one a power, and then I can just go through here and I can say, I want each of these coefficients to be an answer that I'm working off of. Let's say minus 1x as we go through. And I choose these. And so what that will do, and I'll show you the preview in a second, that allows them to kind of fill in the parts without necessarily having to deal with all of the formatting of their answer choice. So you could do that particular piece. I could add a hint if I wanted to. You know, don't forget positive or negative coefficients. And I could choose my easy, medium, hard, and I do want to add a concept. So in order to save it, I have to tag this question to something. So I could search for something in my library. I could say, let's say a, you know, Flexbook. Let's see, do we have any Flexbooks in this library? Nope. Polynomial. So generally you'd search CK-12. It looks like I have something on multiplying polynomials in my library, but if I wanted to search CK-12, I have all of these concepts to work with. So maybe real zeros of polynomials would make sense. So I'm going to tag it there. But that search in your library is a way to tag stuff, especially to non-STEM content where there isn't a particular CK-12 concept. The grade level is an option here. The standards are an option, but they're not required. So the one thing you do need to do is tag it to a concept, whether it's CK-12 or something from your library. And the things that show up from your library are text lessons. So they're pages from a Flexbook. So if you want to create content for, let's say, a topic in US history, then you would make sure that you had a lesson on US history in your library and you could tag it to that particular lesson or read. So if I submit this, I can preview this question and you can see what it looks like. You can see here that we have all of the coefficients here. I have no idea what these ones were. One of these was a 4 or 2 or something like that, maybe a 6. The negative is already accounted for, check it. It looks like I got 3 out of 4 of those right. But that's a way to do kind of a more complicated option where students fill in the different parts and they're not worried about the x cubed, x squared formatting in their answer choices. So that might be useful. I can add a new concept or a new question to my concept. For here, I could also just kind of update this and go from here. Done, and you'll see that question is now available in this question set. So it pulled up the question sets, real zeros of polynomials. It added that to this particular thing because that's what I'm working off of. And if I went in to edit this, I could go ahead and pull questions from there. See if that will load for a second. And you will see things by CK-12. And if you sorted by author, I think this is somewhere in here is the one that I had. Unfortunately, my account also reads as CK-12, but you could sort by author and you'd be able to find your stuff. Let's say I saved this and I went back and let's just pick 5 questions to work off of and let's add a new question. So I wanted to pick a random subset, not a problem. I'm going to edit this again. And the other way to add questions within a concept is to go into that concept and add it from there. So I could choose to add a new question from here, and I can write a new type of question. Let's pick a drag and drop, because that would be a similar one to highlighting in terms of the process for that, or even the fill in the blank one we just did. But let's say I want to go from here, and I want someone to sort the following based on whether or not they are metals. For here, I would put in hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, nickel, iron, and maybe I'd want to actually mix up this order so that they're not automatically easy to tell. And then same deal, I would choose this, I'd add my answers. And then I can go down here and I can add my categories. So this first category, let's say, is a metal, non-metal, and then I'm just going to drag stuff in. So my nickel and my iron, versus my guesses. So we go through here. So I could do that. Notice that this has real zeros of polynomials in here. That is the concept that I was tagging it to. So if you were not doing a random demo like I am and you wanted it tagged to the right concept, you would need to add a new concept in there before you can remove a previous one. So just keep that in mind as you go through. But if I submit this, I can preview that as well. And then once again, they would be sorting these accordingly. Now, same deal. If they got some but not all of them right, right now we don't have a partial credit option. You'd be able to see this answer choice and you could kind of adjust what you wanted in your own gradebook. But in this case, they didn't get full credit for this question. So just kind of keep that in mind. If I close this, one last thing I'm just going to point out for any of you guys that are kind of interested, I would say, notice that once you set your question type, you can't change it after you submit it. So make sure that that is the right question type you're working with. But kind of anything else, just play around with the different question types, the options there. For those of you that want to get extra fancy, this variables option is here. And you can try to play around with that and see if you can kind of add pieces in there. So something to look into. I'm not going to cover it. That's super, super advanced. I can stay on if someone really wants to see it, but just keep that in mind. So if I go ahead and I said I'm done with this, it will show up as the last question selected within that particular lesson. So that makes it really easy to find from here. So sort the following based on whether or not they're metals or non-metals. So you should be able to see that piece. Because I made this question, I have a little pencil edit icon option there. So wherever the other random question is I made would also have that. It looks like it's probably way down at the bottom, which is except where it should have ended up at the beginning. So just kind of keep that in mind that if you start from scratch, you'd find your content at the bottom. If you start where you've already pre-selected some questions, you'll find it at the bottom of the questions that were selected. So I think we're gonna just pause for a second, see if there's any questions you guys have, maybe swap back over and go from there.
Well, while everybody's thinking about some questions, again, see what questions you come up with. We have one more section that we're going to work our way through on inline questions and quizzes in Flexbook 2.0, and then just touch on reports briefly. But before we do that, we sometimes show videos, little snippets of people who we've met along the way who are our users. So I'm going to show you a quick video clip of a man named Jonathan Waters. And we spoke to him in El Paso School District in Texas, and he talked a little bit about how he uses practice and quizzes in his classroom.
So the practice, and especially now with some of the updates, has become more adaptive to where the students are working on different questions. The more questions they get right, they seem to get more challenging. You know, I've noticed as I go around help kids, question number 5 for one student is not question number 5 for another student. And as a teacher, it benefits me because it challenges the students to their level. I think I had a student earlier talk about how it's kind of adjusted to her and it kind of keeps her engaged. And then also, too, it helps me kind of see where these students are at. And then the quizzes I attach to the practices that come from that question bank, those tend to use the same questions for every student. But then again, at the same time, the real-time feedback is something I like, too. So the kids, they take the test, they know immediately what their grade is. They don't have to wait for me to grade a paper, grade an assignment, and then on top of that, they can go back and review and see, okay, I'm missing these types of questions, or I'm doing well in the medium type of questions, but I'm missing the hard questions. And so if they choose to, they can even go back to the practice and kind of work their way back to some of those harder questions.
If you are interested in seeing more testimonials like that, you can click on testimonials in the footer of CK-12, and we've got hundreds of teachers and students and administrators talking about how they use CK-12 in their different situations. So let's move on to the last section about inline questions, quizzes, and Flexbooks 2.0 and reports.
Thanks, Lindsay. So the first thing that we talked about was kind of those inline questions. That is a new feature within lessons. So you can see an example here within the text where it looks like a regular set of practice or quiz questions. The idea behind them is they're designed to help students learn. So they're actually within that lesson there. We recommend if you are creating questions for this that you add feedback as well for wrong answers. That way they are kind of learning in that moment. They're also given multiple attempts, as I mentioned earlier, to complete any question. Hopefully they'll see that feedback as they go, and maybe they'll say, oh, that's why I got that wrong. Let me choose this correct answer. You as a teacher can assign your quiz separately, but if you put it as an inline question, you won't see reports for any work they do within that lesson. So just kind of keep that in mind. So if you open any quiz you have, you can pull that embed code by expanding the ellipses on the left navigation. There you'll see embed as inline questions. When you click on that, it will pop up an embed code option, and you just copy and paste that into your lesson using the edit option and then the media option within Flexbook. So if you have done customization of Flexbooks, that should be familiar to you. If you have not, definitely check out some of those lessons, or I will try to show you that quickly later on if you are unfamiliar and would like me to do that. Just make a note that if you're pulling Plix Interactives, kind of just the basic interactive piece, that's a great example on why you might use and embed inline questions that you've created directly for that interaction. So then the other option for using quizzes in Flexbooks is to actually swap out practice with a quiz. You can do that by kind of choosing that practice in the bottom right corner and then choosing the switch to quiz option. If you don't own or you haven't customized that lesson yet, it'll just have you save it with whatever title you want, including the one that's there if that's better. And then you kind of pick your quiz that you want from there, add it in, and that replaces the practice with a quiz. So if for some reason you wanted to assign a customized version of that as a quiz, instead of the regular practice that's in there, that's a way to swap it out. So you can do that, pick a new one, create a new one, or pick different practice. And then you have some options for assigning if you actually wanted reports. So you can assign the lesson as a whole, where you've swapped out that practice for a quiz, and then it assigns the lesson and the quiz, or you could just assign the lesson and the practice if you wanted. And then our original reads, if they're standalone, if you're using one of those, if you wanted to assign the practice, you could assign the lesson and the practice separately. But then quizzes, you would need to assign kind of distinctly. Now, there are two options. Some people were mentioning Canvas and Schoology. There you'd assign the modality or 2.0 lesson. That's actually live now. It's not coming soon anymore. It is now live within Canvas and Schoology, which is super exciting. And then the other option is from within CK-12 classes. So you could create an assignment within there, and that would allow you to kind of mix practice or quizzes. So that is kind of a multi-concept. You could actually combine a couple practices or a quiz together within a CK-12 class. But your general one, kind of just assign a class option, would assign out to a CK-12 class or to a Google Classroom class. So let's say once you do that, the kind of reason for doing that would be reports. So the practice versus quiz piece on there. So as we noted, the practice is based on 10 correct. So this first person has 100%, they got 10 correct. The person below that only got 5 correct out of that goal of 10, no matter how many questions they might have done. For the last piece on there, that kind of quiz option there, that's a clean percentage score out of the total number of questions versus the questions right. In this case, this was done in a CK-12 class with multiple practices and a quiz together. That's kind of the only option to get those pieces combined together. Otherwise, you'd be assigning kind of individually those different parts. So I am going to go ahead and kind of click over. There's actually, let me see one more part. We're going to talk about insights in Flexbooks. So this is the newest piece. This is currently available for Google classes and for CK-12 classes. So keep that in mind. That in addition to giving you kind of the report for practice or quiz or whatever other modality you had, if you open a 2.0 lesson where that was attached, then it will tell you how much time a student spent on that page on that lesson. We're going to continue to work on other insights where it might give you the majority of your class spent time on this part of this lesson versus this part of this lesson, and some other details in there. You can see the quiz kind of correct 4 out of 8 ratio as well. So that's something that is found within our new Flexbooks. It's found within new assignments you make in Google Classroom and Canvas, but it is something to kind of just keep in mind as some of the advantages for that newer platform that we're working with. So I'm going to do a super quick steal from Lindsay and just show you quickly where you can find those different pieces. So if I went into classes, since we just talked about reports, I'm going to open up a report example from 2.0, and I can see my reports for this class. If you access a class report in Canvas, in Classroom or in CK-12 right now, you would see this similar option. You can see kind of a quiz percentage. If I click on any one of those, it opens, it tells me the number of attempts they had, the questions they answered, what that looks like, where they went. For practice, it will tell you kind of when they started it, the start date of the lesson, and within parts, this person did their work on Tuesday, July 2nd. If they came back to practice and did more another day, it would also show kind of what parts they did at what particular point in time. So you can kind of see those reports across there. And then any of our other assignments that you make, whether it's a real world application or a sim or something, you're just getting that complete or incomplete check mark. So that's a quick reports overview. You can download a CSV if you wanted to play around with that or export it into another system. So that is an option as well for reports. And then I just want to cover kind of where you could use those pieces. So we said in our library, I'm going to close out of this. I can go back to my library, that when I have a quiz, so let's say I want to filter by quizzes, and I am working on average acceleration. I made this quiz earlier. And I also I'm working on a physics book. So I have two options. This interactive physics book. Let's go to chapter 2, section 4. When I'm in that book, I own this book. It's a demo book that I made. I have the option on View Practice to switch this to a quiz. If you don't see this option, it probably means you don't own this book yet. So just make sure that you've customized a book once before you start trying this out. When I swap this to a quiz, because I haven't saved this section before, it will prompt me to kick into that system and save that section. And now I actually have the option to switch this to a quiz. So I could use my quiz here, and you can see my average acceleration quiz. I could choose to add that in place of the practice. And now instead of practice, you'll see this piece. But let's actually swap this back to practice. And maybe I want to use that quiz as inline questions. So I would go back to my quiz for a second. I would expand this, pull this embed as inline questions piece up, copy that link. And then in the book, if I click over into the book, I would actually edit this book. So because I have customized this already, this is now an edit option. And then I can embed this as inline questions. So let's go into that same section. Edit that section, which luckily I've already saved over, so I own that. It's not going to have to prompt me for a new title. And I can embed this as inline questions. Let's just put them kind of under this general average acceleration for easy access. I am going to, it claims I'm still in a header, so we're going to go from there, and I get an embed code, paste it in, and insert that. And if we close it out, we should have an inserted piece there. And if I finalize this section, which it should allow me to do if I start making changes on here. Let's see. We'll try that one more time. It looks like I just had a little glitch in there. Let's do it down here. There we go. Now it's kicking in and working correctly. My connection might have just gotten cut off for a split second. But if I finalize this, and then I open that lesson, you'd actually see those questions directly in that lesson. It was a short quiz. There were only 4 questions, and a student could actually complete them and work their way through right within this lesson. So I think with that, it looks like we may have a couple questions. What we may do is do a couple wrap-up things and then go into answering some of those as we go from there.
Yes, that's perfect, Katie. I think usually we try to wrap as we approach the hour mark, and we are about there. So now is the final time to put in some questions to the Q&A. We'll be right back on answering a few questions. But before we do, I just have a few reminders for you. A reminder that we have this resource page available at the tinyurl.com/CK-12 custom AP 2019. We have upcoming webinars for October and November. We're doing 2 what we call LMS breakout sessions. If you are a user of Google Classroom or you're a user of Canvas or Schoology, we have different webinars that I would encourage you to attend to learn more about how CK-12 smoothly integrates with those systems. If you are a math teacher, we have a Common Core Math on CK-12 webinar as well happening in November. You can go to ck12.org/webinars to register for those and to see archived webinars that we have already finished. And then just a reminder about the Certified Educator Program. If you are already in our July 2019 class and you're just attending webinars to finish your requirements for the summer program, please keep using your same book that you used in July. If you are brand new to the Certified Educator Program and would like more information about how to get started, again, ck12.org/certified and press that register button and we'll get you going. If you have some feedback for us, this is the form that we like to ask you how things went, what we could do better for next time. We read every single comment that you guys take the time to send. So we appreciate it if you have a few minutes. And then just some encouragement that you are supported. You can send emails to support@ck12.org. You can find us on social media at CK12 Foundation. We often use the hashtag CK12 Certified. So if you need to go, we are at that hour mark. Otherwise, I'm going to kick it back over to Katie, who's been looking at the Q&A, and we will plow through whatever Q&A questions you have.
Hi, so one of the questions is asking about inline questions for some of our science books. We are working our way through our math ones. I don't have a timeline on inline questions for our science books, but hopefully those will continue to pass on with requests to that team. I know they are working on kind of teachers editions for those newer books right now, so probably not inline questions immediately, but hopefully those will be coming down the road. We had 2 questions, more questions in here so far. So one has to do with state standards. So I'm actually going to steal the screen for a second and show you what that looks like. So one option to create questions was within something. And then the next one is this create new questions option here. So if I go there and I create a brand new question, I can then tag it to a standard. And you can, let's see if we have, I think the example standard you had, we could, add it to, let's say, ELA for an ELA standard. This does pull, I think, from existing ones. I don't know that you can write your own. Let's see. Yeah, I think it's pulling from our set of standards. So it doesn't look like you could tag them to a specific standard, but if you have a whole batch of standards you'd like us to consider including in that option list, definitely let us know and we can see what we can do about that. We have one more question here. We answered the question about science inline questions. This one here says, I don't know if it was addressed, but what's the best way to refer to the associated text if a student wants to read up on a concept that's brought up to them in an adaptive practice question? So there's actually a couple different ways that I can think about going about doing this. So one is if you're writing a question and you want them to reference something, you could put something in there. If you are going, I'm going to kind of go back to here. So if I go to practice, any practice that they're working on, it should give them associated text. So let's say for here, integer addition, it will actually give them kind of a lesson to work off of or things that they could read. So if you assigned this to a student, let's say I chose this assign a class option, I could put instructions in here, like make sure to read this or watch this video or do something like that if you want to refer them to that. And then I would say our best option is actually through our 2.0. So if you're assigning content from 2.0, so let's say, and I have no idea what particular subject area this person works with, but if you're assigning it from here, when I make an assignment, let's say of elements and compounds, so I'm going to go in here, I can choose to assign this from the top here or from my toolbar over here, or I can assign this to my class. And whether I pick CK-12 or Google Classroom, I'm actually assigning here, let's say this to this class. I could put instructions here, start and due dates, pick the class I want, but I'm assigning both the lesson and the practice. So they have to open this lesson that has the text in it, and then they have to start and do some practice before they're allowed to turn it in. So that would be a good way to kind of keep the text and the lesson together, is to use that newer 2.0 environment, and it's right there already. And I think that is it for the questions that we have open. I would say if you have any more, feel free to reach out to us at support@ck12.org, and we're always happy to kind of support you in that by shooting back an email, sharing some great video links that we have to other webinars. Someone asked about kind of where you can find those, under the Explore, and you can see how all those pieces are. And I think the last question here has to do with how students answered on those reports that I showed you in classes. So if you're using Google Classroom, eventually Canvas, it actually might be out, or it's coming out sooner for Canvas, and CK-12, you can see those class report level pieces. So let's go ahead and here, and that will tell you exactly how your students did on any particular piece, any particular question, and as you go through here. So if I clicked on this practice right here, I can see on the right-hand side, they got 10 correct. Their streak was 4. They spent 5 minutes doing this. They're in this exploring level, so they're kind of getting it, but they haven't really gotten this concept completely. And then you can actually see the questions and answers that they did. So feel free to drill down and get as much information as you need on that. So we're out of questions again. I wish you all a wonderful evening or morning or wherever you are joining us today. And yeah, just reach out if you have questions in the future.